The Little Sisters of the Poor and Priests for Life react to a pivotal Supreme Court ruling. Speaker Paul Ryan's faith precedes politics. We hear his remarks to today's National Catholic Prayer Breakfast. John Kasich keeps his distance from Donald Trump. Why he's not ready to endorse the presumptive GOP nominee. And the White House and Congress clash over Iran. Adherence to the nuclear deal is at the center of that debate. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, May 17th, 2016. Good evening from Washington. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. House Speaker Paul Ryan calls on the Obama administration to protect religious sisters from its contraceptive mandate once and for all. At today's National Catholic Prayer Breakfast, Ryan says he's always advocated for the Little Sisters of the Poor. The High Court sent their challenge of the mandate back to the lower courts this week. Jason Calvi joining us from the Capitol with more. Jason?
Brian, Speaker Ryan has talked about religious freedom many times in the past, but today a new perspective. He says Catholics need to defend religious liberty based on spiritual grounds. He says living out one's faith leads to real joy.
Speaker Paul Ryan says religious liberty is under assault in the United States. That amounts to a crisis, he says, since faith is life-changing.
Once you realize that there is a God, and he is good, and he loves you, not just humanity as a whole, but you, the person. You realize you're not alone.
The Wisconsin native says our happiness is intimately linked with knowing and loving God.
And that is why we object when government restricts religious liberty. When faith is ruled out of bounds, then happiness itself is being placed out of reach.
Speaking to Catholic lawmakers, policy experts, and D.C. professionals, the Republican leader used the Little Sisters of the Poor as an example. He took direct aim at the Obama administration.
The administration has been trying to force them to offer benefits that violate their beliefs.
Ryan says there's a growing need for faith in America. He says that's very evident in the opioid epidemic and the people he meets struggling with addiction.
Do they need the best medical care? Of course they do. Absolutely, yes. But a lot of them need something more.
That something more is faith. And in Ryan's view, the key to happiness.
Every good work is the work of God. It is his grace working inside of us. And when you realize that, you not only lose your pride, you lose any sense of despair.
1,300 people packed in to hear that address today, including, and then also in addition, many people watching on EWTN. Ryan was personal in his address today. He called prayer a hotline to heaven. Brian?
Jason, what a powerful speech. Thank you. And one of the most prominent and outspoken Catholic cardinals says society's trying to create a world without God. Cardinal Robert Sarah, speaking at the prayer breakfast, touched on a topic of fierce debate here in the U.S., gender identity.
Nowhere is clearer than in the thread that society are visiting on the family through demoniac gender ideology, a deadly impulse that is being experienced in a world increasingly cut off from God through ideological colonialism.
Dr. Grazie Christie, a policy advisor to the Catholic Association, is here in Washington. She came for the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast. You heard Cardinal Sarah speak. What did he say and how was it received?
Well, he said that he came to the United States to talk to lawmakers here because what happens in the United States has repercussions all over the world. And he wanted to talk about the fact that in these last few decades, people have become dependent on science and technology and have ejected God from their lives. And when you eject God, you eject truth and love and beauty and goodness. And so what's left behind are these ugly ideologies, what he called demonic ideologies, that are being pushed upon the whole world, including the developing world.
He referred specifically to the gender issue that's so much debated here.
It was really refreshing to hear someone speak about it in such candid terms, in terms that we can understand. How the gender ideology is divorced from reality, from scientific reality, and how it separates man from understanding who he is and his relationship to God. And it causes a lot of suffering, and it should be stopped.
In his comments about this ideology of colonization, did he scold America for pushing its values on the third world?
No, he inspired the lawmakers that were listening to him. He inspired them tremendously, I'm sure, because he enjoined them to do three things: to be faithful, to be prophetic, and to pray. And that if they did these three things, they would be able to bring all this beauty that God offers us, as understanding of ourselves and of family and life, and then America can bring it to the rest of the world.
And then House Speaker Paul Ryan, a very high-profile Catholic politician, walking a line between religion and politics.
Paul Ryan said something I thought was very beautiful. He said that we don't defend religious liberty only for material reasons, because our religious institutions do so much material good, but we also defend them for spiritual reasons. Because when man knows God, then he has contentment. He knows that he is loved, and he can live that life of joy and peace that is only attainable through that knowledge of God. And when we remove religion, we lose our joy, we lose our happiness.
How refreshing to hear that from a politician. Dr. Grazie Christie, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Now, other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. The Senate passes legislation today allowing families of the September 11th attacks to sue the government of Saudi Arabia. By a voice vote, senators approved the so-called Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act. Riyadh has threatened to pull billions of dollars from the U.S. economy if the bill, which now goes to the House, is enacted. Many Senate Democrats back the bill, putting them at odds with the president, who is likely to veto this measure. Two more states hold presidential primaries today. Republicans and Democrats vote in Oregon. Democrats also vote in Kentucky, which already held its Republican caucus in March. Hillary Clinton needs just a few more delegates to clinch the Democratic nomination. Former presidential candidate John Kasich says he is not ready to endorse Donald Trump. The Ohio governor says he hopes Trump will become more positive and unify this country.
I'm undecided here about what I'm going to do in this race. I've made it clear that I need to see a positive approach. And, if there's one not forthcoming, it's going to be a real problem.
Kasich says he is not interested in being Trump's vice president because he and Trump have very different messages for the American people. And a no-show on Capitol Hill today. Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes was supposed to brief the House Oversight Committee about how he promoted the Iran nuclear deal to the public. He skipped the hearing. Now some Republicans want him fired. Chief White House correspondent and political director Lauren Ashburn reports.
Brian, the White House dug in its heels and did not allow Ben Rhodes to appear, citing separation of powers. To borrow from Dr. Seuss, their stance goes something like this: I will not testify here or there. I will not testify anywhere. Ben Rhodes got into hot water when he told the New York Times Magazine last week that he intentionally created an echo chamber of allies to build public support for the nuclear agreement with Iran. House Oversight Committee Chairman Jason Chaffetz says Rhodes should have to explain and clarify his remarks, and his fellow Republicans are fuming.
It's the president's privilege, not Ben Rhodes' privilege. So if you're talking to reporters about conversations you have with the president, then you've waived that privilege. So if you can talk to a reporter, then how can you not talk to Congress?
Really, the ones who should be upset should be the Democrats. Most of the Republicans voted against it. It was the Democrats that were hoodwinked into voting for something based on testimony and really a narrative that was not accurate.
The White House is defending the move.
The President of the United States should be able to get confidential, candid advice from his top advisors.
White House counsel says in a letter to the House Oversight Committee that allowing Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes to testify would threaten the president's, quote, ability to receive candid advice. Brian.
Lauren Ashburn at the White House. Thank you, Lauren. Baghdad suffers from another series of attacks, including a suicide bombing claimed by ISIS. The car bomb struck a crowded market in Baghdad's northeastern Shab neighborhood, killing nearly 36 people. 9 more people died in a bombing at a restaurant. Altogether, today's attacks claimed 69 lives and many more were wounded. Doctors Without Borders is critical of the U.S. military for not properly compensating victims of a mistaken attack on a hospital in Afghanistan. The Pentagon blamed the attack in Kunduz last October on human error. Doctors Without Borders, which operated the hospital, wants the U.S. to pay the victims' families more. Investigators believe a train engineer went from distraction to disaster, resulting in the deadly Amtrak crash in Philadelphia last year. He was apparently listening to radio traffic from a nearby commuter train that had just been hit by a rock. A report released today by the National Transportation Safety Board says a contributing cause was the lack of a speed control system. The Amtrak train entered a curve at more than twice the speed limit and derailed, killing 8 people. Catholic leaders voiced support for the Little Sisters of the Poor as they challenge Obamacare's contraceptive mandate. In fact, the Little Sisters got a standing ovation today at the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast.
And sisters, know that we stand with you in prayerful solidarity. And I'd ask that you all please join me in thanking them for their fidelity, their courage, their service to the church and the least of our brothers and sisters.
Supporters applaud what they see as a win for religious liberty. The Supreme Court Monday sent the Little Sisters of the Poor's case back to lower courts. That means they will not have to pay millions of dollars in fines. Wyatt Goolsby sat down with Sister Constance Veit today.
Sister Constance, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
This week, the Supreme Court had an opinion, a decision, and the result of that is that the Little Sisters of the Poor do not have to pay any fines. What was your reaction?
I heard it on my way to Mass. The thought was, what better thing could I be doing at this moment than going into Mass, the center and source of our life, to just thank God in that moment for his intervention on our behalf. And so although I was like super wound up, it was the best place to be, and the best way to react was just to offer thanks.
What has it been like these past, not only the past couple of months, but the past couple of years for the Little Sisters?
It's just been the general anxiety of what is going to be the final outcome of this. And at the same time, we've also really tried to shelter our residents, our elderly residents, their families, and our staff from really worrying. Because, you know, if we talked about the prospect of not being able to continue our mission, that's a great source of anxiety.
Absolutely. There's a concern because you could have been fined tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah, it would be $70 million a year. So that's an insurmountable amount for anybody, especially a community like us who relies on providence and donations to keep going, just to meet our daily expenses.
The Little Sisters of the Poor have received support from so many groups across the country during this time period. What have you heard from people? That's probably the most positive comments.
It's just beautiful to realize there are people out there all over the place, in many instances that we don't even know about, who are out there praying for us. Because we've come in contact with so many people we never would have met otherwise. You know, we spend our lives quietly doing what we do, and we're in contact with just other people in long-term care and other members of the Catholic Church. But our horizon has been so broadened by this in a good way.
Looking forward now, technically this case goes to the lower courts. It's
Correct.
Not technically done yet.
Correct.
Is there still a level of anxiety on your part about what could potentially happen from here, or is there a sense of relief?
For me personally, there's a sense of relief. I'm sure our legal team would say there's some level of anxiety because until they have it over the goal line. But for me, I can't say that there's anxiety because I have absolute confidence in God, and as close to absolute confidence as you can have in human beings in our team at the Beckett Fund, and they're going to get it over the line.
And I know that a lot of people have been inspired by the Little Sisters of the Poor. Sister Constance, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, Pope Francis grants an interview addressing key issues facing the Church. Mary Shovelin has details from Rome. And Christian persecution, where it stands 2 months after the State Department declared genocide. Thanks for joining us Tuesday evening, May 17th. I'm Brian Patrick, and Pope Francis gives a wide-ranging interview to a French Catholic newspaper. Our Rome producer, Mary Shovelin, joining us to take a closer look at some of the topics covered in that interview. What did the Pope say about living according to the Church's universal missionary mandate?
The Holy Father was referring to our mandate that receive in our baptism, that mandate to be missionaries through the Holy Spirit. And he was responding to a question about the shortage of priests. And he said, well, we don't necessarily need priests to evangelize. We all have the capacity through the Holy Spirit that we receive through the sacraments to go out and preach God's word throughout the world.
So he quoted Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI saying, Tolerance must be zero. In what context did he say that?
He was responding to a question by the French journalists to an ongoing case of child abuse investigation in France, which has been widely covered there. And Pope Francis said it's hard to look back after decades that these things have taken place. But he said, I will say what my predecessor, Benedict XVI, said: in these abuse cases where children's lives are destroyed, there must be zero tolerance and no time limits on when these things must be addressed.
And before we let you go, give us a quick update on the Veit leaks investigation, the trial there.
I was in the courtroom this morning, Brian, and the Holy Father had wished that this process conclude before the Year of Mercy began, which was back in December. But unlike the Veit leaks trial back in 2012, which lasted only 4 days, this one has 5 defendants, and we're 6 months in. But my Vatican insiders tell me that they expect this trial to wrap up by the end of May, at least the trial, and then we'll have appeals and then sentencing after that. So hopefully it will finish as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mary Shovelin in Rome. And the House passes an international religious freedom bill by voice vote.
In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed.
The bill's sponsor says it gives religious freedom a greater role in diplomacy and creates a list of the worst violators. The bill requires diplomats to be trained and the ambassador at large for international religious freedom to report directly to the Secretary of State. We'll have more with the bill's lead sponsor tomorrow on EWTN News Nightly. Secretary of State John Kerry calls the situation in Syria deeply disturbing. He is meeting in Vienna with counterparts from other countries, seeking an end to the 5-year-old civil war.
None of us, no one, can be remotely satisfied with the situation in Syria. It's deeply disturbing. And we are all concerned about the levels of violence that broke out in recent days, challenging the cessation.
Kerry says Russia is cooperating with the U.S. toward achieving a complete ceasefire. 2 months ago today, the State Department declared genocide against Christians and other religious minorities in the Middle East. Andrew Walther of the Knights of Columbus recently talked with us about progress being made since then. We discussed the genocide's long-term impact for Christians in that region.
This sort of crescendoed in 2014, so we're coming up on the second anniversary of what happened in terms of the Nineveh Plain and Mosul. And what I'm told by the people there is that things are very tenuous for the Christians. I mean, on the one hand, they're safe. Those from Iraq that are now in the Kurdish region are safe physically, but if the aid decreases in any way, if anything slows down, I was told by someone who was just there that they think that if the aid were to stop from private charitable organizations, things would fall apart in 30 days.
And the Knights of Columbus, a leader, $10 million or more raised for these folks. Is it improving the situation for them at all?
Well, absolutely. There's a short-term situation and a long-term situation. The short-term situation is they need to have food, clothing, shelter, just the basic necessities of life. The longer-term situation is how do you rebuild a life when everything's been taken from you and you've been forcibly evicted from your home. And that gets to a question of the rights that they have if they wish to stay in the Kurdish regional area, if they wish to move back to the homes that they were evicted from. In each of these cases, the question is the same, namely, how do you make sure that they have equal rights? How, it's imperative that they not be treated as second-class citizens, that religious minorities have full and equal treatment.
We're now 2 months out from the genocide declaration. What's the next step?
Well, there are a lot of things being talked about. There are appropriations being looked at. There are specific policy measures being talked about. And obviously, this is a problem that didn't start overnight, and it's not a problem that's going to go away overnight. So I think that in the medium term, this is going to be a problem not only for this administration, but for the next administration as well.
And what can we do as Christians to practically help?
I tell people I think there are 3 things. The first is we can pray for the people that are there because they desperately need our prayers. Second, we can help to inform people of the fact that there are Christians in the Middle East. In fact, St. Paul, as Archbishop Jean Bart likes to tell us from Aleppo, was accepted into the church by Syrian Christians.
Right.
And third, they can donate to the Knights of Columbus and other groups that are physically doing things in these areas with the kinds of partnerships that get things done.
Very good. Andrew Walther with the Knights of Columbus. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Up next, controlling the spread of Zika. Congress seeks a compromise on a health spending bill. And Priests for Life's Dr. Alveda King reacts to Monday's Supreme Court ruling. watching EWTN News Nightly. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick, and the International Olympic Committee may discipline 31 athletes from 12 countries. They tested positive in a doping investigation. Their blood samples from the 2008 Beijing Olympics were recently retested using new enhanced techniques. The athletes were planning to compete at the Olympics in Rio de Janeiro this summer, but now may be banned from the Games. The Senate approves a $1.1 billion measure to combat the Zika virus. The bipartisan bill is more than 40% less than President Obama wanted. The White House calls the lower amount woefully insufficient. Zika can cause serious birth defects and is expected to spread more rapidly during the summer mosquito season. The Supreme Court's Monday decision impacts not only the Little Sisters of the Poor, but 6 other challengers of the contraceptive mandate. Dr. Alveda King, Director of Civil Rights for the Unborn at Priests for Life, is joining us by Skype from Atlanta. So Priests for Life is a petitioner in this case. Alveda, what's your reaction to the Supreme Court move?
Hello, Brian, to you and your viewers. Our reaction at Priests for Life, where I'm Director of Civil Rights for the Unborn, we of course know that it's an uphill battle. We are part of the group of plaintiffs against the HHS mandate, which is requiring people who of faith to provide birth control for our employees. So whether or not we agree with that, we are being mandated to do that by this law. And I believe that it is just unfair. It's against our religious freedoms. So by the Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court, sending it back to the states, of course, that gives us an opportunity to continue to promote that message. But Brian, it kind of reminds me like Pilate and Jesus, you know, I wash my hands of this, send it back to someone else. So that's exactly how I felt when I heard about the decision. But I believe that people of faith will be able to continue to get this message across.
So the fight certainly isn't over. What comes next?
Well, I believe now the battle, as we take it to the states, it may be a state by state. Blessedly, we have networks across the country. When I say we, of course, at Priests for Life, with our various components. I'm Director of Civil Rights for the Unborn. We have Rachel's Vineyard, Silent No More Awareness. There are many ways. Father Frank Pavone with the priests in communicating the importance of this message to the parishes. So we'll be getting correct and proper information as we inform, educate, and activate the communities. And we hope that people will be calling their state legislators, their state senators, their governors, and et cetera. So we will move forward to say that life is so sacred that we don't want to harm women or babies with this HHS mandate.
Now, you come from a family of ministers, so this religious freedom issue is very personal to you, isn't it?
It is so personal to me. As the niece of Martin Luther King Jr., my dad, Reverend A.D. King, is his brother. They fought in the civil rights movement in the last century, but now they're in heaven together. And I believe they would encourage me to fight for religious freedom. That is what is at stake, and people need to understand that. It's not about a birth control pill or a shot. It's about religious freedom. And so we need to be able to communicate that fact and to stand for truth.
Dr. Alveda King with Priests for Life, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
What a powerful voice for life. Thank you for joining us, too. Until tomorrow, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night. God bless.